My name is Mindy. I'm 34 years old, and last Christmas Eve, I stood in my parents' living room with my phone trembling in my hand as I hit play on a recording that would destroy our family forever. The room fell completely silent as my mother Dorothy's venomous voice filled the air, saying terrible things about my children when she thought no one was listening. My father Harold's face drained of all color while extended family members gasped in shock around us. This was the moment I finally exposed years of emotional abuse. Before I continue this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Are you someone who's dealt with toxic family members too? Please hit that like button if you believe in protecting children from harmful relatives, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what happened when I finally stood up to my parents. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this Christmas confrontation changed everything for my kids and me. Looking back now, I should have seen the warning signs much earlier. I work as a marketing manager for a tech company in suburban Minnesota. And after my divorce 3 years ago, I've been raising my two kids, Emma, who's 10, and Lucas, who's 8, mostly on my own. To everyone on the outside, my parents Harold and Dorothy seemed like the perfect grandparents. They hosted elaborate holiday gatherings at their sprawling house, complete with matching Christmas sweaters and professional photographers to capture our perfect family moments for their annual cards. They showered Emma and Lucas with expensive gifts, the latest gaming consoles, designer clothes, trips to amusement parks. Their Facebook page was filled with photos of them hugging my children, captions about how blessed they were to be grandparents. Our extended family constantly told me how lucky I was to have such supportive parents, especially after my divorce. My brother Keith and his wife Sandra would always chime in about what wonderful grandparents they were to their daughter Aria, who was 11 and seemed to excel at everything she touched. But there were subtle signs I initially dismissed as my own oversensitivity. My mother would make comments about Emma's weight, always disguised as concern. "Oh, sweetie, are you sure you want that second cookie? You know how hard it is to lose weight once you gain it." She'd pinch Emma's sides and suggest maybe swimming would help her slim down for summer. My father Harold would compare Lucas to Keith constantly. "Your Uncle Keith was reading chapter books at your age. Maybe we should get you tested for learning disabilities." Sandra, my sister-in-law, would sit there with this slight smirk whenever my parents criticized my kids. She'd add fuel to the fire with comments like, "Well, Aria just naturally stays thin because she's so active in gymnastics. Maybe Emma needs more structured activities." I noticed she particularly enjoyed when my children were compared unfavorably to her daughter, though she always maintained this facade of concerned aunt. As the months passed, I watched my vibrant, confident children begin to change. Emma started refusing to wear anything but baggy clothes, claiming she looked fat in everything else. She'd been begging to take ballet classes, but suddenly announced she didn't want to anymore because she wasn't the right type. Lucas, who used to chatter nonstop about his favorite books and video games, became increasingly quiet. He developed a stutter that appeared primarily around my parents. The breaking point came when I was cleaning Emma's room and found her diary fallen behind her desk. I wasn't planning to read it, but it had fallen open to a page that made my blood run cold. In her little girl handwriting, she'd written, "Grandma says I'm too fat for ballet. She said the other girls would laugh at me in a leotard. She said it when Mommy wasn't there. She told me not to tell because Mommy gets upset about everything since the divorce. I hate visiting Grandma's house." I confronted my mother that same evening, driving to their house with the diary entry photographed on my phone. She was in her pristine kitchen preparing for another family dinner. When I showed her what Emma had written, she barely glanced at it before launching into her defense. "Oh, Mindy, you're being dramatic as usual. I'm only concerned about Emma's health." Childhood obesity is an epidemic in this country. Would you rather I let her develop diabetes? When I pointed out that Emma wasn't even remotely overweight, that her pediatrician had confirmed she was perfectly healthy, my mother's mask slipped slightly. Doctors today are too politically correct. They won't tell parents the truth. I'm trying to save that girl from a lifetime of struggle. You should be thanking me instead of attacking me like this. My father walked in during our argument and immediately took my mother's side. Mindy, you've always been too sensitive. This is exactly why your marriage failed. You blow everything out of proportion. Your mother loves those children more than life itself. How dare you accuse her of hurting them? That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I had an old smartphone in my drawer from before my last upgrade. I charged it up, downloaded a recording app, and set it to activate with one touch. The next family gathering, I would leave it hidden in their living room. If my parents were saying these things when I was just in the next room, what were they saying when I wasn't there at all? My hands shook as I tested the recording app, making sure it would pick up clear audio from across a room. I told myself I was probably overreacting, that I wouldn't find anything too terrible. Part of me hoped I was wrong, that Emma had misunderstood that my parents' love for their grandchildren was real beneath their harsh words. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong in that perfect house with its perfect holiday decorations. The facade was cracking, and I was about to discover what darkness lay beneath. 3 weeks before Christmas, our entire family gathered for Thanksgiving at my parents' house. I arrived early with Emma and Lucas, ostensibly to help with cooking, but really to execute my plan. While my mother directed me to peel potatoes, and my father showed the kids his new model train set in the basement, I carefully placed my old phone behind a decorative vase on the mantel, making sure it was completely hidden, but positioned to record the main living area clearly. The house filled with relatives throughout the morning. Keith and Sandra arrived with Aria, who immediately began showing off her latest gymnastics trophy. My mother fawned over her, loudly proclaiming her a natural athlete just like her father. Emma shrunk into herself, pulling at her sweater. Various aunts, uncles, and cousins filed in the house, buzzing with conversation and the smell of turkey. Everything seemed perfectly normal, just another family holiday. About an hour before dinner, my phone rang. It was supposedly an emergency call from work about a server crash that needed immediate attention. In reality, I had discovered later, Sandra had contacted my colleague Brett, spinning some story about needing to pull a prank on me, getting him to call with a fake emergency. I apologized profusely to my mother for having to step away and went out to my car to take the call, making a show of pulling up my laptop and looking stressed. I sat in my car for 40 minutes, my heart racing as I thought about what might be happening inside. Through the window, I could see the family moving around, but I was too far away to hear anything. I forced myself to wait, to give them enough time to reveal their true selves. When I finally walked back in, apologizing again for the work emergency, the scene looked identical to when I'd left, except for two crucial details. Emma was nowhere to be seen, and Lucas was sitting rigidly on the couch, his face pale. I found Emma locked in the downstairs bathroom, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. Through her tears, she told me Grandma had said terrible things, but she was too upset to explain clearly. When I returned to check on Lucas, I realized with horror that he had wet himself, but was too terrified to move or tell anyone. My 8-year-old son sat in his own urine rather than risk drawing attention to himself. The rest of Thanksgiving dinner was a blur. I cleaned up Lucas without making a scene, found Emma a quiet corner with her tablet, and somehow made it through the meal. My parents acted as though nothing had happened, my mother even commenting on how quiet the children were being, as if it were a blessing. Sandra kept shooting me these knowing looks across the table, and I wondered if she had any idea what had transpired while I was gone. Late that evening, after we'd returned home and I'd gotten the kids settled, I retrieved the phone during a fabricated return trip to collect a forgotten jacket. My hands trembled as I sat in my bedroom, headphones in, and played the recording. What I heard made me physically sick. The moment I'd left my mother's sweet grandmother voice had transformed into something cruel and cutting. "Emma, come here. Let me look at you. Good heavens, that sweater isn't hiding anything, is it? You're getting bigger every time I see you. No wonder your mother can't afford clothes that fit you properly." Her voice dripped with disgust. "You want to know the truth. You'll never be pretty enough for pageants like your cousin Arya. Look at her naturally thin, graceful. And look at you. Ballet. The other girls would laugh you off the stage." My father's voice joined in focusing on Lucas. "Boy, stop that stuttering. What are you, retarded? Your Uncle Keith could recite Shakespeare at your age. You can't even get through a sentence without stammering like a fool. No wonder your father left. Who wants a son who can't even speak properly?" The recording captured my children's soft crying, their repeated phrases of "I want mommy," ignored by their grandparents. Sandra's voice appeared too suggesting that perhaps the children needed professional help for their obvious issues. She mentioned knowing a therapist who specialized in children from broken homes. Even Keith's voice was there weakly protesting once that they were being too harsh, only to be shut down immediately by both parents telling him he was too soft, that this was why Arya was successful and my children were not. The 40-minute recording contained a masterclass in psychological torture. They told Emma she was an embarrassment to the family. They told Lucas his stutter made him sound stupid, and that's why other kids didn't want to play with him. They discussed my divorce in front of them, how I had damaged them beyond repair, how they were just trying to fix what I had broken. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up transcribing every word, creating timestamps, building a file. This was just one recording, but it painted a picture of systematic emotional abuse. How many times had this happened? How many family gatherings had included these torture sessions? I thought about every time my kids had been reluctant to visit their grandparents. Every stomach ache before a family dinner, every nightmare after. The guilt of not protecting them sooner was overwhelming. The next morning, I made two decisions. First, I would gather more evidence. One recording might not be enough, and I needed to understand the full scope of what my children had endured. Second, I would need allies. My parents were pillars of the community, respected and admired. If I was going to protect Emma and Lucas, I would need irrefutable proof and family support. The battle ahead would be ugly, but after hearing my babies cry on that recording while their grandparents destroyed their self-worth, I knew there was no going back. I hugged my children extra tight that morning, telling them they were perfect exactly as they were. Emma looked at me with those wise beyond her years eyes and whispered, "Mommy, do we have to go to Grandma's for Christmas?" The hope in her voice when I said we'd see nearly broke my heart. I wouldn't let them down again. 2 days after Thanksgiving, I received an unexpected text from my cousin Bethany. "We need to talk, not over the phone. Can you meet me at the coffee shop on Martin Street?" Bethany had always been quiet at family gatherings, keeping to herself and her daughter, Aria, Keith's daughter's namesake cousin, who was 12. I agreed to meet her, curious about the urgency in her message. Sitting across from me at a corner table, Bethany looked exhausted. "I saw what happened on Thanksgiving," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was in the hallway when your parents were talking to Emma and Lucas. I've been sick about it ever since. Mindy, this isn't the first time I've witnessed them being cruel to your kids." My heart raced as Bethany revealed she'd been documenting incidents for months, unsure of what to do. She showed me notes on her phone, dates, times, specific comments. The pattern was undeniable. Every family gathering included what she called torture sessions, where my parents would isolate my children and subject them to verbal abuse. She'd been too afraid to speak up, worried about causing family drama, but Thanksgiving had pushed her over the edge. There's more, Bethany continued, pulling up her daughter's texts. Little Arya told me something disturbing. Your parents have been pitting the cousins against each other. They tell my Arya that she's superior to Emma, that she should feel proud when Emma fails. They're creating a hierarchy among their own grandchildren. It's sick. I showed Bethany my recording, and we sat in stunned silence after listening. She then revealed something that made my blood boil. There was a family group chat that I had never been invited to. My parents had created it specifically to exclude me, and they used it to spread lies about my mental state and my parenting. Bethany screenshotted months of messages for me. The messages were a masterclass in manipulation. Dorothy would share concerns about my children's behavior, always painting them in the worst light. She claimed Emma was showing signs of an eating disorder, when in reality, my mother's comments had driven her to hide food in her room out of shame. She said Lucas was potentially autistic and needed immediate intervention, using his stutter as evidence. Most disturbing were her repeated statements that I was mentally unstable since the divorce and incapable of providing proper structure. Sandra featured prominently in these conversations, I discovered. She was my parents' primary informant, twisting every conversation we'd had into evidence of my supposed instability. When I'd confided in her about struggling to balance work and single parenthood, she'd reported to the group that I was overwhelmed and neglecting the children. When I'd mentioned considering therapy for myself to process the divorce, she'd told them I was mentally breaking down and needed intervention. The shock of Keith's participation hurt almost as much as my parents' cruelty. He would occasionally defend me, but weakly, and always ended up agreeing with whatever narrative our parents pushed. In one exchange, he admitted he was afraid of losing his inheritance if he challenged them too strongly. Our parents had made it clear that their considerable estate would only go to the stable family members who understood family values. Armed with this new information, I confronted Keith at his office. He worked as a financial advisor in a gleaming downtown building, the success my parents constantly held over my head. When I showed him the screenshots and played portions of my recording, he crumbled. I knew it was wrong, he admitted, unable to meet my eyes. But Mom and Dad control everything. Sandra's business loan, our house down payment, Arya's college fund. They made it clear that supporting you meant losing everything. The conversation took an even darker turn when Keith revealed something that made my hands shake with rage. They've been documenting everything, Mindy. They have a file, photos, videos taken out of context. They've been building a case for over a year. Last month, they met with a family lawyer about pursuing custody of Emma and Lucas. They think you're an unfit mother. I felt the room spin. My parents weren't just emotionally abusing my children. They were actively planning to take them from me. Keith gave me the lawyer's name, Bradley Morrison, one of the most expensive family attorneys in the state. The pieces started falling into place. The excessive gifts, the public displays of grandparently affection, the documentation of every perceived failing. They were building a custody case. That evening, I called my ex-husband James. We'd had an acrimonious divorce, but we'd finally reached a stable co-parenting arrangement. When I asked him about my parents' involvement in our divorce, his silence told me everything. Finally, he admitted, "Your mother contacted me repeatedly during the proceedings. She offered to testify about your erratic behavior and emotional instability." She met with me privately, showed me photos of the house when it was messy, videos of you yelling at the kids when they wouldn't get ready for school. She said she was concerned about the children's welfare. The betrayal cut deep. My own mother had actively worked to sabotage my divorce proceedings, potentially affecting custody arrangements. James admitted he'd been swayed by her performance. The concerned grandmother worried about her grandchildren. It had influenced his initial push for primary custody, though he'd eventually realized the manipulation and backed off. But the damage to our relationship and the additional legal fees from the extended battle had been real. I reached out to my friend Monica, a family law attorney who'd helped with my divorce. When I laid out everything, the recordings, the screenshots, the custody threat, she immediately went into protective mode. We need to document everything immediately, create backups of all recordings, get written statements from Bethany and anyone else who's witnessed this behavior. And Mindy, you need to start recording every interaction with them from now on. Monica explained that my parents' wealth and community standing made them formidable opponents, but their arrogance might be their downfall. They think they're untouchable, which means they're probably not being as careful as they should be. Keep gathering evidence. Let them think you're still in the dark. And whatever you do, don't restrict their access to the kids yet. We don't want to give them any ammunition for their custody claim. Over the next 3 weeks leading to Christmas, I became a detective in my own family. I recorded every phone call, every interaction. I discovered my parents had been showing up at my children's schools, taking photos through classroom windows, trying to speak with teachers about the kids' home situation. The school principal confirmed they'd had to ask my father to leave after he tried to attend a parent-teacher conference without my permission. Bethany and I grew closer, united in protecting our children from the family poison. She revealed more disturbing patterns: how my parents would buy affection before major family events, ensuring the children would seem happy in photos; how they would interrogate the kids about my dating life, my finances, my work schedule, gathering intelligence for their case; how they'd convinced several family members that I was struggling with substance abuse, a complete fabrication that explained some relative's strange behavior toward me recently. As Christmas approached, I had amassed a file that would make any lawyer proud. Hours of recordings, dozens of screenshots, statements from teachers about my parents' inappropriate school visits, documentation of their attempts to alienate my children from me. But I knew they were planning something big for Christmas. Sandra had let slip to Bethany that it would be a Christmas no one would forget, that they were planning an intervention for my sake and the children's. I spent sleepless nights preparing, knowing I was walking into an ambush but feeling ready for war. My babies had suffered enough. The facade of the perfect family was about to shatter, and I would be the one holding the hammer. They thought they could take my children, destroy their self-worth, and paint me as an unfit mother. They were about to learn exactly what kind of mother I really was, one who would burn down the entire family structure to protect her cubs from predators, even if those predators shared our blood. Christmas Eve arrived with a fresh snowfall that made everything look deceptively peaceful. I dressed Emma and Lucas in the new outfits I'd bought them, not the ones my parents had sent over with tags specifically chosen to flatter their body types. Emma wore a beautiful red dress that made her feel like a princess, while Lucas sported a cozy sweater featuring his favorite video game character. Their genuine smiles that morning gave me strength for what was coming. I had prepared meticulously for this day. My phone was fully charged with the recording app ready. I had backup recordings stored in 3 different cloud services and had given Monica access to everything. Bethany would be there with her family as planned, and we had a signal system worked out. Most importantly, I had prepped my children without scaring them, simply telling them that if they felt uncomfortable at any point, they should come directly to me no matter what anyone said. We arrived at my parents' house at 4 in the afternoon to find cars already lining the street. This was unusual as typically only immediate family came for Christmas Eve with extended relatives joining for Christmas Day dinner. My stomach tightened as I recognized cars belonging to aunts, uncles, cousins who lived hours away. Whatever my parents had planned, they wanted an audience for it. The house looked like something from a magazine decorated to perfection with twinkling lights, elaborate garlands, and a massive tree that touched the cathedral ceiling. My mother greeted us at the door in an elegant cocktail dress, her smile bright and brittle. "There's my beautiful family. Come in, come in. Everyone's been waiting for you." The emphasis on everyone sent chills down my spine. The living room was packed with at least 30 relatives, far more than usual. But what made my blood run cold was the woman sitting in my father's usual chair, a leather portfolio on her lap, and a sympathetic expression plastered on her face. She was professionally dressed in a way that screamed medical professional, and I knew immediately this was their ambush. "Mindy, dear," my mother said, guiding me toward the woman with a firm hand on my back. "This is Dr. Patricia Winters. She specializes in family dynamics and helping families work through difficult transitions. We thought it would be helpful to have her join us tonight." Before I could respond, my father stood up, commanding the room's attention. "Everyone, please take a seat. We have something important to discuss as a family." The relatives arranged themselves in a rough circle, leaving me, Emma, and Lucas conspicuously in the center with Dr. Winters. I felt like we were on trial, and in a way we were. Dr. Winters opened her portfolio and smiled warmly at me. "Mindy, your family has reached out because they're concerned about you and your children. This isn't an attack. It's an intervention born of love. They want to help you become the mother Emma and Lucas deserve." The room erupted in a carefully orchestrated performance. Aunt Geraldine started talking about how she'd noticed I looked exhausted and overwhelmed at recent gatherings. Uncle Robert mentioned concerns about my emotional volatility. Cousin after cousin shared prepared statements about my supposed failings as a mother, each one more ridiculous than the last. Someone even mentioned that I'd been seen buying wine at the grocery store as evidence of a drinking problem. Sandra's performance was Oscar-worthy. She produced an iPad and began showing videos she'd secretly taken at family gatherings. Each one was edited to remove context, showing only moments where I looked frustrated or the kids seemed unhappy. A video of me checking my phone while Emma talked became evidence of neglect. A clip of Lucas crying after falling at the park became proof I couldn't protect him. One showed me raising my voice to call the kids in from the yard, framed as verbal abuse. "We've all seen Mindy struggling since the divorce," Sandra said, fake tears rolling down her cheeks. "The children are suffering. Emma has gained weight from stress eating, and poor Lucas can barely speak without stuttering. They need stability, routine, the kind of structure Harold and Dorothy can provide." I watched my children shrink into themselves as adult after adult detailed their perceived flaws and my supposed failures. Emma's face had gone pale, and she gripped my hand so tight her knuckles were white. Lucas had begun to rock slightly, a self-soothing behavior that appeared when he was extremely anxious. Dr. Winters nodded sympathetically throughout this character assassination, occasionally making notes. "Mindy, I understand this must be difficult to hear, but your family has documented some concerning patterns. The children's behavioral issues, your work schedule that keeps you away from home, the instability in your personal life. Have you considered that Emma and Lucas might benefit from spending more time in a structured environment?" My mother leaned forward, reaching for Emma. "We've prepared such a lovely room for you upstairs, darling. Would you like to see it? You could stay with Grandma for a while. Wouldn't that be nice?" Emma recoiled from her touch, pressing closer to me. That's when my father made his big move, the one they'd clearly been building toward. We've consulted with our attorney, Mindy. We're prepared to petition for temporary custody while you get the help you need. Dr. Winters has agreed to testify about what she's observed here tonight. It's what's best for the children. The mask had finally slipped completely. This wasn't an intervention. It was a custody ambush designed to create evidence for their legal case. They'd brought in a psychologist to witness their version of events, packed the room with relatives who would testify to their lies, and created a paper trail of my supposed instability. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd pushed too hard too fast. "Stop lying about Mommy!" Emma suddenly screamed, jumping to her feet. Her small body shook with rage and fear. "You're all liars. Grandma tells me I'm fat and ugly when Mommy's not there. Grandpa calls Lucas stupid. They're mean to us and you all pretend they're nice." The room froze. Lucas, triggered by his sister's outburst and the mounting stress, broke completely. He ran from his seat and dove under the dining table, curling into a ball as a full panic attack took hold. His breathing came in gasps, and I could see he was seconds from hyperventilating. My father, perhaps sensing his carefully orchestrated plan falling apart, made a critical error. He stormed over to the dining table and grabbed Lucas's arm, roughly trying to drag him out. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. The boy needs discipline, not coddling. He's acting like a baby because you've made him weak." Something in me snapped. Watching my father manhandle my terrified 8-year-old son, while a room full of relatives did nothing, finally pushed me past my breaking point. I pulled out my phone, my hands steady now with righteous fury. "Don't touch my son. Everyone in this room needs to hear something right now." I pulled up the audio file I'd prepared, a compilation of the worst moments from my recordings. My mother's voice filled the room, crystal clear and undeniably cruel. "Emma's getting so fat she'll need to shop in the women's section soon. No boy will ever want her." Then my father. "Lucas sounds retarded when he talks. Maybe we should look into special schools for slow children." The room sat in stunned silence as recording after recording played. My parents calling my children damaged goods from a broken home. Sandra suggesting they needed psychological evaluation for their obvious developmental delays. My mother discussing her plans to document my failures to build a custody case. My father on the phone with their lawyer strategizing about how to make me look unstable. Dr. Winter's face had gone through a dramatic transformation as she realized she'd been manipulated into participating in an elaborate scheme. She stood up slowly, closing her portfolio with shaking hands. "This is not what I was told I was here for. This is abusive. These recordings, are they authenticated?" Before I could answer, a loud crash interrupted everything. My mother, in her desperation to stop the playback, had lunged for my phone. I dodged, and she crashed into the Christmas tree instead. The massive pine toppled over in what felt like slow-motion ornaments, shattering across the hardwood floor in an explosion of glass and tinsel. Emma, who had been standing nearby, cried out as flying glass caught her arm, leaving a thin line of blood. "Look what you've done!" My mother shrieked at me, completely oblivious to the irony. "You've ruined Christmas. You've destroyed this family." She stood among the wreckage of her perfect Christmas decorations, her carefully styled hair now wild, her mask of the loving grandmother finally completely gone. My father pulled out his phone, his face purple with rage. "I'm calling the police. You're clearly unstable and violent. Everyone here has witnessed your behavior. You attacked your mother, and your daughter is injured because of your actions." But before he could dial, Bethany stood up, holding her own phone high. "I've been recording too, Uncle Harold. I got everything, including you grabbing Lucas and Aunt Dorothy causing the accident. Would you like to explain to the police why you've been emotionally abusing your grandchildren?" The silence that followed was deafening. Extended family members looked between my parents and me, processing what they'd just witnessed versus what they'd been told. The careful narrative my parents had constructed was crumbling in real time, and everyone could see it. Dr. Winters spoke first, her professional composure returning. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, I need to be very clear. What I've witnessed tonight, both in those recordings and in this room, constitutes emotional child abuse. I'm mandated by law to report this. I strongly suggest you get legal counsel, but not for a custody case. You're going to need defense attorneys. She turned to me, her expression softening. Mindy, I'm deeply sorry for my role in this. I was told you were struggling with mental health issues and needed family support. I had no idea I was being used as a weapon against you. I'll be happy to provide a statement about what actually occurred here tonight, including the attempted parental alienation and the emotional abuse I witnessed. My mother made one last desperate attempt. Those recordings are illegal. You can't record people without their permission. We'll sue you for invasion of privacy. But even as she spoke, more family members were pulling out their phones, having recorded portions of the confrontation themselves. I gathered my children while Bethany helped me. Emma's cut was superficial, but I used it as an excuse to leave immediately. As I headed for the door, Lucas clinging to me like a koala and Emma holding my hand, I turned back to face the room one last time. I have months of recordings. I have documentation of your stalking at their schools. I have screenshots of your lies and manipulation. But most importantly, I have the truth. Any of you who choose to side with them after what you've witnessed tonight will be cut from our lives permanently. My children deserve family who actually loves them, not people who use them as pawns in sick power games. As we walked out into the snowy night, I heard the room explode into arguments behind us. Aunt Geraldine's voice rose above the rest. Dorothy, you did the same thing to my daughter 20 years ago. I've kept quiet all this time, but not anymore. The perfect family was finally fracturing, and I felt nothing but relief. I buckled my children into the car, checking Emma's arm once more, and wrapping Lucas in the emergency blanket I kept in the trunk. As I drove away from that house of horrors, Emma spoke from the back seat. Mommy, we don't have to go back there ever again, do we? No, baby. I promised, meeting her eyes in the rearview mirror. We're never going back. The aftermath of Christmas Eve exploded across our family like a bomb. By the time I got home and settled the kids with hot chocolate and their favorite movie, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Text messages, missed calls, and voicemails poured in from relatives who had witnessed the confrontation. The carefully maintained facade of the perfect Henderson family had shattered, and everyone was scrambling to figure out where they stood in the wreckage. Aunt Geraldine called first, her voice trembling with decades of suppressed rage. Mindy, I need you to know I believe every word. They did the same thing to my Claire when she was young. Told her she was stupid, that her learning disability made her an embarrassment to the family. I was young and scared of them, then let them convince me it was for her own good. Claire is 35 now and still in therapy. I've lived with this guilt for 20 years. More stories poured out as the night progressed. Cousin Robert revealed that my parents had sabotaged his small business loan application years ago because he'd refused to exclude his adopted son from family events. My father had considered the child not real family and punished Robert for challenging him. Another cousin shared how they'd been written out of the will for marrying someone my parents deemed beneath the family standard. The most shocking revelation came from my brother Keith at 2 a.m. He showed up at my door, Sandra conspicuously absent, his eyes red from crying. I need to tell you everything, he said, collapsing onto my couch. What followed was a confession that reframed our entire family dynamic. Sandra's been stealing from Mom and Dad for 3 years. He began, his voice hollow. Started small cash from their wallets during visits, then graduated to credit card fraud. She's taken almost $50,000. I found out 6 months ago, and when I confronted her, she broke down. She's got a gambling addiction, online poker. She was desperate to pay off her debts before they noticed. The pieces clicked into place. Sandra's eager participation in my parents' schemes, her constant deflection of attention onto my children's supposed problems, her inside knowledge of family finances. She'd been using me and my kids as a shield, keeping my parents focused on our manufactured crises while she bled them dry. She had access because Mom trusted her with their online banking, Keith continued. Said she was helping them modernize their finances. Every time Mom and Dad started to question strange charges, Sandra would create some emergency about you. Remember when she told them you were drinking heavily? That was the same week she withdrew $5,000 for a business investment. Keith had been trapped between his wife's criminal behavior and his parents' manipulation. Sandra had threatened to claim he was involved if he exposed her, while our parents held his financial dependence over his head. He'd watched them torment my children, while knowing his silence was paid for with stolen money. By morning, the family group chat I'd been excluded from had exploded into chaos. Bethany sent me screenshots as relatives began choosing sides. Some staunchly defended my parents, unable to reconcile the image they'd maintained with the reality exposed. But more surprising was how many shared their own stories of manipulation, control, and abuse spanning decades. The revelation about Sandra came out when Dale, her husband's brother, posted bank statements he'd found. He'd grown suspicious of Sandra's spending and done his own investigation. The evidence was damning: luxury purchases, cash withdrawals, payment to online gambling sites, all traced back to my parents' accounts. My mother's response was predictable and vicious. She immediately blamed me, claiming I'd somehow orchestrated Sandra's theft to destroy the family. Dr. Winters followed through on her promise to report what she'd witnessed. By December 26th, Child Protective Services had opened an investigation. The irony wasn't lost on me that my parents' attempt to prove me unfit had resulted in them being investigated for child abuse. The CPS worker, a no-nonsense woman named Janet, interviewed me, and the children separately reviewing the evidence I'd collected. In 30 years of doing this job, Janet told me, I've rarely seen emotional abuse documented so thoroughly. Your parents made a crucial error thinking their wealth and status would protect them. If anything, it makes this worse. They had every resource to be good grandparents and chose cruelty instead. My father tried to salvage his reputation by calling an emergency meeting at his country club, inviting his business partners and golf buddies to hear his side. It backfired spectacularly when Dr. Winters attended uninvited and calmly explained what she'd witnessed. Several of his longtime friends distanced themselves immediately, one mentioning he'd always found Harold's comments about children disturbing, but had dismissed them as generational differences. The community response was swift. My mother was asked to step down from her position on the church auxiliary board when word spread about the recordings. The private school where she'd volunteered as a reading tutor politely informed her that her services were no longer needed. Their carefully cultivated image as pillars of the community crumbled within days. Meanwhile, the legal machinery ground into motion. My parents hired the Morrison law firm as planned, but their strategy had to shift from offense to defense. Instead of pursuing custody, they were now fighting potential criminal charges for harassment and stalking related to their school visits. The principal had provided security footage of my father attempting to remove Lucas from school without permission, claiming a family emergency. Keith filed for divorce from Sandra after discovering the extent of her theft and manipulation. During the proceedings, more disturbing facts emerged. Sandra had been feeding my parents information about me that she'd completely fabricated. The supposed evidence of my drinking problem: she'd photographed her own wine bottles in my recycling bin during visits. The claims about my dating life: pure fiction designed to paint me as unstable. But perhaps the most satisfying fracture came from within my parents' own marriage. The stress of exposure broke their united front. During a particularly heated argument overheard by neighbors, my mother blamed my father for being too aggressive at Christmas Eve. He retaliated by revealing that the custody plot had been entirely her idea, that he'd only gone along to keep peace. They turned on each other with the same viciousness they'd shown my children. My children's recovery became my primary focus as the family drama unfolded around us. Emma started therapy with a specialist in emotional abuse recovery. In her first session, she drew a picture of herself that broke my heart. A tiny figure surrounded by huge dark clouds, labeled with words my mother had used against her. But week by week, those clouds got smaller and the figure grew bigger and brighter. Lucas's progress was even more remarkable. Away from the constant criticism and anxiety of family gatherings, his stutter began to fade. His teacher called to tell me he'd volunteered to read aloud in class for the first time all year. When I asked him about it, he said simply, "Grandpa's not here to say I sound stupid, so I knew I could do it." 3 months after Christmas Eve, I received a formal letter from my parents' attorney. They were offering a substantial financial settlement in exchange for my agreement not to pursue criminal charges or share the recordings publicly. The number was staggering, clearly meant to buy my silence and protect what remained of their reputation. I met with Monica to discuss the offer. She advised me to consider it, carefully pointing out that the money could secure my children's education and future. But as I sat in her office, I thought about all the family members who had suffered in silence for decades, all the children who might still be vulnerable to their manipulation. "I want to make a counteroffer," I told Monica. "The same amount, but it goes into a trust for therapy and support services for all family members affected by their abuse. They also have to attend a year of family therapy themselves and provide proof of completion. And they sign an agreement acknowledging the abuse and promising no contact with my children until they're 18 and can decide for themselves." Monica smiled. "They'll never agree to admit wrongdoing. It goes against everything they are." "Then we go to court," I replied, "and every recording becomes public record." The negotiations took another month. In the end, they agreed to everything except the public acknowledgement. The trust was established, providing funds for therapy for any family member who needed it. Aunt Geraldine's daughter Claire was the first to apply, finally getting specialized treatment for the learning disability my parents had shamed her for decades ago. The restraining order was finalized in early spring, requiring my parents to stay 500 feet away from my children, their schools, and our home. The judge, after reviewing the evidence, made it clear that violations would result in immediate jail time, regardless of their standing in the community. As I write this, it's been 1 year since that explosive Christmas Eve. Our family is smaller now, but healthier. Keith and I are rebuilding our relationship slowly, both of us in therapy, to deal with the lifetime of manipulation we endured. Some relatives chose to side with my parents, unable to accept the truth, and that's their choice. But the ones who remained have formed a tighter, more genuine bond. My children are thriving. Emma performed in her dance recital last month, beaming in her tutu, no longer hearing my mother's voice telling her she was too fat for ballet. Lucas joined the debate club and discovered he's actually an eloquent speaker when not paralyzed by anxiety. They still have hard days, shadows of trauma that surface unexpectedly, but they're learning that they are worthy of love exactly as they are. Last week, I received a letter forwarded through their attorney. My mother had written it, 10 pages of justifications, blame, and demands for reconciliation. I read it once, then added it to the file with all the other evidence. Maybe someday, if they do the work and truly change, we can have some form of relationship. But that would require them to acknowledge the pain they caused, and I won't hold my breath. The extended family still talks about that Christmas Eve as the night everything changed. For some, it's a tragedy, the destruction of a dynasty. But for my children and me, it was the night we broke free. The night I stood up with my phone and showed everyone who Harold and Dorothy Henderson really were behind their perfect facade. The scars remain, but we're healing. And most importantly, my children now know that their mother will always protect them, even if it means burning down the entire family structure to keep them safe. That's the gift I gave them that Christmas Eve, not wrapped in paper and bows, but in fierce love and unwavering protection. It's the only gift that really mattered. Spring arrived with a sense of renewal that felt symbolic of our new life. 3 months had passed since the restraining order was finalized, and our days had settled into a peaceful rhythm I'd forgotten was possible. Saturday mornings were now filled with pancakes and laughter, instead of dread about upcoming family gatherings. Emma had joined the art club at school and spent hours creating colorful paintings of flowers and butterflies, a stark contrast to the dark sketches she'd made in therapy initially. The ripple effects of Christmas Eve continued to spread through our extended family and community. My parents had launched a calculated smear campaign on social media attempting to control the narrative. They posted old photos of happy family gatherings, writing lengthy captions about being heartbroken over being kept from their grandchildren. Their friends initially rallied around them, sharing posts about grandparents' rights and the tragedy of parental alienation. But truth has a way of surfacing. When Dale finally pressed charges against Sandra for theft, the local newspaper picked up the story. Prominent local family embroiled in fraud scandal ran with a photo of my parents at a charity gala. The article didn't mention the abuse allegations, but it opened the door for people to start questioning the Henderson family's carefully crafted image. Monica called me one afternoon with an update that made me drop my coffee mug. Your mother contacted Child Protective Services. She filed a complaint alleging neglect, claiming the children aren't receiving proper medical care for their obvious psychological issues. The irony was breathtaking. The very people who had caused my children's trauma were now weaponizing their healing process. But CPS had already investigated my parents, and Janet, our original caseworker, saw right through the retaliatory complaint. She closed it immediately, adding a note to their file about harassment. This escalation prompted me to take additional protective measures. I installed security cameras around our house and made sure the school had updated emergency contact lists, explicitly excluding my parents. I also started documenting every drive-by of their car. I noticed every flying monkey relative who suddenly wanted to catch up every piece of mail they sent despite the no-contact order. During this time, unexpected allies emerged. James, my ex-husband, stepped up in ways I never anticipated. He'd been carrying guilt about believing my mother's lies during our divorce and threw himself into making amends. He adjusted his work schedule to take the kids more often, giving me breathing room to handle the legal battles. He also provided a crucial affidavit about my mother's interference in our divorce proceedings. I was an idiot, he admitted during a co-parenting meeting. Dorothy played me like a fiddle, and I was so angry about our marriage ending that I wanted to believe you were the villain. I'm sorry, Mindy. I'm sorry I let them use me against you. His apology didn't erase the past, but it marked a turning point in our co-parenting relationship. The kids noticed the change immediately. Lucas mentioned how nice it was that Mommy and Daddy don't argue anymore. That simple statement made both of us realize how much our children had been carrying. The financial forensics from Sandra's theft revealed the depth of my parents' wealth and their control mechanisms. They had been using money as a weapon for decades, keeping detailed spreadsheets of every gift, every loan, every financial favor. Keith discovered he'd been paying them back for his college tuition through inflated interest rates on a family loan that should have been cleared years ago. But the most disturbing discovery came from the contents of my father's home office, which police searched as part of Sandra's fraud investigation. They found files on every family member containing personal information, financial records, and notes about perceived slights and useful leverage. My file was the thickest dating back to my teenage years, documenting every time I challenged them or failed to meet their expectations. In May, I received an unexpected call from Dr. Patricia Winters. She'd been following up on her mandated report and wanted to check on the children. During our conversation, she revealed something that shouldn't have surprised me but did. Your parents tried to hire me after Christmas Eve. They wanted me to write a report stating you'd coach the children to lie. I declined and reported the contact to the authorities. They've since approached 3 other psychologists with the same request. This pattern of doubling down rather than reflecting was classic Harold and Dorothy. Instead of using their resources for therapy or self-improvement, they were spending thousands trying to rewrite history. Each failed attempt added to the paper trail of their harassment and manipulation. By summer, Emma's transformation was remarkable. The anxious, self-conscious girl who hid in baggy clothes had blossomed. She auditioned for the lead in the day camp play and got it beaming with pride as she told me about rehearsals. When she asked if she could invite her grandparents to the performance, my heart broke a little. "Sweetie, you know why they can't come," I said gently. "I know," she replied. "I just sometimes wish they were different people. Like, what if they were the grandparents they pretended to be?" It was a profound statement from a 10-year-old recognizing the difference between grieving the grandparents she'd wanted and accepting the ones she'd actually had. Lucas's progress was equally impressive, but manifested differently. His stutter had completely disappeared, and he'd become protective of other kids who were struggling. His teacher told me he'd stood up to a bully who was mocking a classmate's speech impediment, saying firmly, "Words can hurt more than hitting. My grandpa taught me that by being mean to me." The validation from authority figures continued to pile up. The school counselor provided a detailed report about the positive changes in both children since December. Their pediatrician noted improvements in Lucas's anxiety-related stomach issues and Emma's return to healthy eating patterns. Every professional confirmed what I knew: removing my parents from their lives had been the right decision. In July, Bethany organized a Freedom Family Barbecue, inviting all the relatives who had broken free from Harold and Dorothy's control. 15 people came, spanning 3 generations. We shared stories, laughed about memories that weren't tainted by manipulation, and watched our children play together without the shadow of judgment and comparison. During the gathering, Aunt Geraldine's daughter Claire spoke about her experience in therapy. "For 25 years, I believed I was stupid because they told me so. Every struggle I had, every challenge I faced, I heard their voices saying I was defective. Therapy is helping me realize that dyslexia isn't a character flaw, and neither am I." These testimonies reinforced the generational pattern of abuse my parents had perpetuated. But they also showed the power of breaking that cycle. Each person who spoke up made it easier for the next one to share their truth. August brought another legal development. My parents' attempt to modify the restraining order was denied, but not before they'd submitted character references that became public record. Reading through them was illuminating. Many were from people who barely knew them personally, business associates who praised their financial acumen and charity donations. The few personal references were notably silent about their qualities as parents or grandparents. One reference stood out from their former housekeeper, Maria, who'd worked for them for 15 years. She wrote carefully but honestly about witnessing their strict expectations for family members and their tendency to use harsh words when disappointed. Reading between the lines, it was clear Maria had seen more than she was comfortable explicitly stating. As fall approached, I focused on building new traditions with my children. We planned our own Thanksgiving celebration, inviting our chosen family of friends and supportive relatives. Emma and Lucas helped plan the menu, excited about having input instead of being told what was expected of them. The week before Thanksgiving, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a photo album my mother had compiled filled with pictures of seemingly happy family moments. Each photo had a sticky note with her commentary before Mindy destroyed everything. When we were a real family, what the children have lost. I sat with the album for a long time, feeling the weight of intergenerational trauma it represented. In every photo, if you looked closely, you could see the signs. My forced smile, Keith's tense shoulders, the children's wide eyes when near their grandparents. What my mother saw as evidence of a happy family, I now recognized as documentation of survival. I made a decision that felt both destructive and liberating. I took the album to our fire pit and with Emma and Lucas watching began removing photos. We kept the ones that showed genuine moments, usually when my parents weren't in frame. The rest, especially the staged, perfect family portraits, went into the fire. "Why are we burning them, Mommy?" Lucas asked. "Because we get to decide which memories we keep," I told him. "And we only keep the ones that were real." Emma added thoughtfully, "Like how Grandma used to say I was pretty for a big girl. That wasn't real nice, so we don't need to remember it." As the photos burned, I felt years of gaslighting and manipulation turn to ash. My children weren't losing their family history. They were being freed from a false narrative that had never served them. Monica called with news that my parents had hired their third law firm. The first two had dropped them after reviewing the evidence. This new firm was known for taking difficult clients and aggressive tactics. She warned me to be prepared for escalation, possibly including private investigators or attempts to circumvent the restraining order. Sure enough, within a week, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked outside Emma's dance studio. The same car appeared at Lucas's school and outside my office. I documented everything, took photos of the license plate, and had Monica file a harassment complaint. The investigator was identified and warned that any contact with my children would result in criminal charges. This escalation, rather than frightening me, actually strengthened my resolve. Every desperate move my parents made added to the evidence of their inability to respect boundaries or accept consequences. They were so used to controlling the narrative that they couldn't adapt to a reality where their money and influence weren't enough. The year anniversary of that explosive Christmas Eve approached with mixed emotions. My children had blossomed in ways I'd never imagined possible. Emma had grown 3 inches and carried herself with confidence that radiated from within. Lucas had become an avid reader, devouring books without anyone criticizing his pace or comprehension. I'd grown too. The woman who had once made excuses for her parents' behavior, who had doubted her own perceptions and blamed herself for their cruelty, was gone. In her place stood someone who trusted her instincts, protected her children fiercely, and refused to accept anything less than genuine love from anyone claiming the title of family. Our support network had solidified into something beautiful. Bethany had become my closest confidant. Her daughter and Emma had formed a tight bond based on mutual support, rather than competition. Keith, free from both our parents' manipulation and Sandra's toxic influence, was rebuilding his life and his relationship with us. The wider impact continued to ripple outward. Other families in our community, seeing our story unfold, began examining their own dynamics. The local family therapy practice reported a significant increase in clients seeking help for generational trauma. Dr. Winters had started a support group for families dealing with narcissistic abuse, using our case as a teaching example with permission. As Christmas approached again, I felt none of the dread that had characterized holidays past. We planned a quiet celebration at home with James joining us for Christmas morning and Bethany's family coming for dinner. The children made wish lists that included simple things: art supplies for Emma, books for Lucas, and at the top of both lists, a happy Christmas with no yelling. They would get their wish. Our home had become a sanctuary where emotions were validated, mistakes were learning opportunities, and love wasn't conditional on performance. The contrast to my childhood was stark, but that was the point. I was giving my children what I'd never had the freedom to be themselves without fear. The legal battles would continue. My parents' money ensured that. But they'd already lost the only fight that mattered. They'd lost access to two amazing children who were flourishing without their toxic influence. They'd lost the power to define our worth or control our narrative. Most importantly, they'd lost the ability to perpetuate their cycle of abuse into another generation. As I tucked my children into bed on Christmas Eve 1 year after everything changed, Emma asked, "Mommy, are you happy we don't see Grandma and Grandpa anymore?" I chose my words carefully. "I'm happy you're safe. I'm happy you know you're perfect exactly as you are. I'm sad they couldn't be the grandparents you deserved, but I'm not sad about protecting you from people who hurt you, even if those people are family." Lucas added sleepily, "Next Christmas will be even better because we'll be further away from the bad stuff." Out of the mouths of babes came wisdom it had taken me 34 years to learn. Distance from toxicity, whether measured in time or space, allowed healing to flourish. We were living proof of that truth. 1 year later, as autumn painted the leaves in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, I sat in my kitchen sorting through mail when I noticed a thick envelope from Morrison Law Firm. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, though I'd grown stronger and steadier with each passing month. Inside was a letter from my mother, forwarded through their attorneys to comply with the no-contact order. The 10-page letter was a masterpiece of manipulation, denial, and blame-shifting. Dorothy's familiar handwriting filled page after page with justifications, twisted retellings of events, and demands for reconciliation. She claimed I had misunderstood their concern for the children, that the recordings were taken out of context, and that I was denying Emma and Lucas their rightful heritage by keeping them away. The final pages contained what she clearly thought was her trump card: Harold had been diagnosed with a heart condition. She wrote in detail about his failing health, the medications, the doctor visits, clearly expecting that medical guilt would accomplish what legal threats hadn't. "Your father may not have much time left," she wrote. "Do you really want your children to lose their grandfather without saying goodbye?" I set the letter aside and called Monica. We'd anticipated this move. The health crisis manipulation was textbook for people like my parents when other tactics failed. Monica confirmed what I'd suspected: Harold's heart condition was high blood pressure, manageable with medication and lifestyle changes. Hardly the death sentence my mother was implying. That evening, after the kids were asleep, I made a decision. I would meet with my parents one final time, not for reconciliation, but for closure. I needed to look them in the eye and speak my truth without the chaos of family witnesses or the immediate need to protect my children. Monica arranged for the meeting to take place at her law office with security present and everything recorded. 2 weeks later, I sat in the conference room watching my parents enter with their latest attorney. The year had aged them. My mother's perfectly coiffed hair showed gray roots she'd never have allowed before. My father moved slower, his commanding presence diminished. But their eyes still held that familiar coldness, that absolute certainty that they were the victims in this story. "Thank you for coming," their attorney began, but I held up my hand. "Let me be clear why I'm here," I said, my voice steady. "This isn't a reconciliation. This is me giving you one opportunity to hear the truth about the damage you've caused, not just to my children, but to generations of this family." My mother started to speak, but her attorney touched her arm, reminding her of the agreed-upon format. I would speak first uninterrupted, then they could respond. I pulled out a small recorder and placed it on the table. I'm going to play something for you. These are Emma and Lucas recorded last week when their therapist asked them about their grandparents. Emma's voice filled the room, first older now, at 11 more articulate, but still heartbreakingly young. I used to think I was ugly because Grandma said so. She told me I was too fat for ballet, too clumsy for gymnastics, too plain to be in pageants like my cousin. I believed her for so long. I used to cry myself to sleep and wish I could be different. Now I know she was wrong, but sometimes I still hear her voice when I look in the mirror. Then Lucas, his voice clear and stutter-free. I was scared to talk because Grandpa said I sounded stupid. He called me the R word and said I was broken. I didn't want to read at school or answer questions because I thought everyone would laugh at me like he did. My therapist says I'm actually really smart, and that stuttering doesn't mean anything bad about me. But I still get scared sometimes that people think I'm dumb. The recording continued for several minutes, my children describing in their own words the fear, shame, and pain my parents had inflicted. They talked about dreading family visits, about stomach aches and nightmares, about feeling like they had to be perfect or their grandparents wouldn't love them. When it ended, the room was silent. My father's face had gone pale, and for the first time I saw something crack in his expression. My mother, however, remained defensive. "Those children have been coached," she said coldly. "You've turned them against us with your lies and manipulation." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Even now, even hearing their pain in their own voices, you can't take responsibility. This is why they're better off without you. I pulled out a folder and spread its contents on the table. Photos of Emma from the past year performing in her dance recital, grinning with her art club trophy, laughing at her birthday party. Pictures of Lucas reading to younger kids at the library building, elaborate Lego creations, speaking confidently at his school's talent show. This is who they are without your criticism, your comparisons, your conditional love, I said. They're thriving because they're no longer being torn down by the people who should have built them up. My father finally spoke, his voice rougher than I remembered. We only wanted what was best for them. We wanted them to be strong, successful. You wanted them to be perfect reflections of your image, I interrupted. You never saw them as individual human beings with their own worth. They were just props in your performance of the perfect family. I stood up, feeling the strength of every therapy session, every small victory, every day I'd chosen healing over hatred. I'm done hoping you'll change. I'm done waiting for apologies that will never come. But I needed you to know that your legacy isn't what you think it is. It's not your money, your reputation, or your perfect house. Your legacy is the trauma that multiple generations are now in therapy to overcome. My mother's composure finally cracked. How dare you speak to us this way? After everything we've done for you, the money we've spent, the opportunities we gave you. Everything you gave came with strings, I replied. Every gift was a debt, every kindness a manipulation. That's not love, Mom. That's control. I placed one final item on the table, a photo of our Freedom family gathering dozens of relatives who had chosen healing over hierarchy. This is our family now. People who love my children without conditions, who celebrate their quirks instead of criticizing them, who see their worth beyond their achievements. This is what family actually looks like. As I turned to leave, my father called out, "Mindy, wait." His voice broke on my name. "Is there nothing we can do? No way to make this right?" For a moment, I saw a glimpse of the father I'd always wished for, one capable of vulnerability and genuine emotion. But it was too little too late. "Yes," I said quietly. "You can get intensive therapy. Real therapy, not hiring someone to validate your version of events. You can do the hard work of understanding why you needed to control and belittle children to feel powerful. You can write letters of apology to every family member you've hurt without excuses or justifications. You can respect our boundaries and stop trying to force your way back into our lives. And maybe if you do all of that, Emma and Lucas can decide for themselves when they're adults if they want a relationship with you. But that's their choice to make, not yours and not mine. I left them sitting in that conference room looking older and smaller than I'd ever seen them. As I walked to my car, I felt a weight I'd carried my entire life finally lift. I'd said everything I needed to say. There were no more words left unsaid, no more hope for a different ending to our story. The months that followed brought unexpected peace. My parents, perhaps finally understanding the finality of my words, stopped their legal maneuvers. The flying monkey relatives gradually gave up their attempts at forced reconciliation. The restraining order remained in place, but it became almost irrelevant as they finally seemed to accept the consequences of their actions. Our second Christmas without them was magical in its simplicity. Emma choreographed a dance performance for the family, confident and radiant in her movements. Lucas read "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" aloud to everyone, his voice clear and strong. James joined us again, bringing his new girlfriend who fit seamlessly into our chosen family dynamic. As I watched my children laughing with their cousins, I realized the profound gift hidden in our painful journey. By breaking the cycle of abuse, I hadn't just saved my children, I'd freed them to become their authentic selves. They would grow up knowing their worth wasn't tied to their achievements or their ability to meet impossible standards. They would love and be loved without manipulation or condition. Bethany raised a glass of cider for a toast. To the family we choose, the children we protect, and the cycles we break. We all raised our glasses, even the kids with their juice boxes. Looking around the room at these people who had stood by us, who had chosen truth over comfort and protection over peace, I felt richer than my parents, with all their money had ever been. Later that night, as snow began to fall outside, Emma crawled into my lap despite being almost too big for it. "Mom, I'm really glad you stood up to Grandma and Grandpa, even though it was scary and made everyone upset." "Me too, baby," I said, holding her close. "Do you think they're sad?" she asked, wise beyond her years. "I think they might be," I answered honestly. "But their sadness isn't our responsibility to fix. Our job is to be healthy and happy and kind." Lucas joined us on the couch, making it a proper cuddle pile. "Maybe someday they'll learn how to be nice for real, not just pretend nice." "Maybe," I agreed. "But whether they do or don't, we're going to be okay." As my children drifted off to sleep against me, snow painting the world clean and white outside, I thought about the journey we'd taken. From that horrible Thanksgiving, where I'd first recorded their cruelty, through the explosive Christmas confrontation, the legal battles, the family fractures, and finally to this place of peace and healing. It had been the hardest thing I'd ever done, but also the most important. I'd learned that protecting those we love sometimes means burning bridges that were already rotten with dysfunction. That family isn't about blood or obligation, but about who shows up with genuine love and support. That children deserve to be cherished exactly as they are, not molded into someone else's vision of perfection. Most importantly, I'd learned that breaking generational cycles of abuse is possible. It requires courage, support, and often professional help. It means grieving the family you wish you'd had while building the family you need. It's messy and painful and sometimes lonely. But on the other side of that pain is freedom, the kind that lets children dance without shame, speak without fear, and love without conditions. As I carried my sleeping children to their beds, I whispered a promise to each of them. "You will never have to earn my love. You will never be too much or not enough. You are perfectly, wonderfully you, and that will always be more than enough." The story of our family's transformation wasn't the one my parents would tell. In their version, they were victims of an ungrateful daughter who poisoned their grandchildren against them. But the truth lived in my children's laughter, in their confidence in their ability to express emotions without fear of judgment. The truth lived in the peace that filled our home, no longer disrupted by criticism, disguised as concern or cruelty, masquerading as love. This was our story, messy and imperfect, but real. A story of standing up to power, protecting the vulnerable, and choosing healing over hatred. A story that began with pain, but led to profound joy. A story that proved love, real love, doesn't require perfection. It only requires showing up with an open heart and the fierce determination to do better than what was done to us. As I closed my own bedroom door that night, I looked at the photo on my nightstand. Our Freedom family gathered together, faces bright with genuine smiles. This was the legacy I was creating for my children, not one of control and criticism, but of courage and compassion. Not perfection, but authenticity. Not conditional love, but acceptance. The phone on the nightstand no longer held recordings of cruelty. Instead, it was filled with videos of Emma's performances, Lucas's presentations, family dinners full of laughter, moments of pure joy, untainted by judgment. This was the evidence that mattered now, proof that we had not just survived, but thrived. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new growth, new opportunities to reinforce the lessons we'd learned. But tonight, in our little house, filled with love and free from fear, we were exactly where we needed to be. We were home not just in a physical sense, but in the deep soul sense of being surrounded by people who loved us without condition. And that was the greatest gift of all. What would you do if faced with the choice between family harmony and protecting your children? Have you ever had to stand up to toxic family members who others saw as pillars of the community? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help it reach others who might need to hear that they're not alone in dealing with family dysfunction. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories about overcoming adversity and breaking generational cycles. And please share this video with anyone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Sometimes knowing that others have walked this path can provide the courage to take the first step toward freedom. Thank you for listening to my story. May you find the strength to protect what matters most, and the wisdom to know that real family is defined by love, not blood. Until next time, remember, you deserve to be treated with kindness and respect, especially by those who claim to love you.